אוקיי, זה נהיה ויראלי, אז אמרנו, אוקיי, נשים את זה גם פה. הנה הראיון המלא שלי עם מארק לוין בפוקס ניוז, בתוכנית Life, Liberty and לוין, עם כתוביות בעברית, באדיבות פיד ימין, שעשו את זה בהתנדבות. אולי ראיתם שראש הממשלה צייץ את זה יחד עם הכיתוב חובת צפייה, אז אם זאת חובת צפייה, לפי ראש הממשלה, מי אני שאני אחלוק עליו? אז הנה 12 דקות המלאות עם תרגום לעברית להנאתכם.
Welcome back, America. I have a very special guest right now. His name is Gadi Taub. Gadi Taub is well known in the country of Israel. He is an Israeli historian. He is a senior lecturer at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's also a commentator from time to time on my favorite channel in Israel, Channel 14. The reason I brought you here, Gadi Taub, is because Benjamin Netanyahu is facing a sort of a tyrannical judiciary and attorney general in a way that the American people simply do not understand. He is a wartime president. He's been a fabulous wartime president for the people of Israel. He works very closely with our president, Donald Trump, who went through all this lawfare stuff where his opponents tried to stop him, imprison him, bankrupt him, and so forth and so on. There's a real parallel going on here between what's happening right now to the Prime Minister of Israel and what happened to our president. Would you like to explain that a little bit, please?
Yeah, except that you are in a much better position. If there's any parallel, it's Donald Trump's first term in office, where he was almost paralyzed by the FBI, but take that to the power of 10, because Israel is technically no longer a democracy. What happened to Israel is that the judiciary has amassed more and more powers. And in the end, if you define sovereignty as the authority of final decision on everything political and legal, then our Supreme Court now solidified its authority with a move that it struck down a constitutional amendment. We don't have a constitution. We have constitutional, semi-constitutional laws, and it now it usurped the power of constitution formulating. Imagine, Mark, that your Supreme Court would strike down the 25th Amendment or the second article of the Constitution. It's hard to explain to people outside Israel the Alice in Wonderland legal surrealism in which we live. So they could not defeat the left could not defeat Benjamin Netanyahu in the polls repeatedly. And when he reached his fourth term, that's 10 years ago, 2015, the press was clamoring for prosecution. And they began with investigative pieces. And you know, in Israel, just like in America, there's a symbiosis between law enforcement and the press, in a way that the press is no longer the watchdog of democracy. It is the attack dog of law enforcement. And under this symbiosis, the investigations against Benjamin Netanyahu began, and they are patently absurd. If I try to explain to foreigners what Netanyahu is being blamed for and how it's falling apart in court, you sound like you're fantasizing. They are trying there is a bribery charge against Netanyahu, which, by the way, the judges have already said have no basis in the evidence, in which we are supposed to believe that he got favorable coverage, and in return for favorable coverage in some marginal website, he gave regulatory waivers to some business owner. This is all falling apart in court. Since when is coverage a form of bribery? And would you be surprised if I tell you that once you look into the coverage on that site, it was uniquely hostile to Benjamin Netanyahu? So this coalition of the press, the permanent bureaucracy, and police in Israel, along with the left side of the aisle, is trying to remove a sitting prime minister, which it could not defeat in the polls. Russiagate, anyone?
Yeah, and you point out judges, generals, and bureaucrats, and we'll add state law enforcement. Now, what's interesting about your court, and I want the American people to understand, the Israeli court is more like a Politburo. It's more like an old Soviet Politburo. That's what it is. Yeah. They are of like mind. They appoint each other. They have cut the Knesset completely out of it. They claim they have the power to look into anything. Anybody off the street can file a complaint, even though they don't have standing, and the court has said, well, we're allowed to look at that. So they get tens of thousands of petitions a year, and they sit there like this Politburo on high above the society of Israel, and they decide, you know what, we're going to decide if the military can do this. You know what, we're going to decide if the Orthodox Jews can do this. You know what, we're going to decide if the street sweeper has to wear a hat, doesn't have to wear a hat. Any aspect in the civil society, big, small, or in between. It doesn't matter what the Knesset has to say. It doesn't matter what the government, which is a coalition of a bunch of parties, has to say. The Supreme Court decides. Now, when we come back, Gadi Taub, we've had some great legal minds in the United States who have despaired by what's going on with your court system there, who have despaired about the out-of-control attorney general you have who doesn't actually report to the government, because it appears the attorney general works with the courts, and the courts work with the press, and the press works with law enforcement. My God. And the man is the commander-in-chief of the Israeli forces, and you're surrounded on 7 sides, and they drag him in the court 3 days a week, 3 hours a day for nothing. Welcome back, America. We're here with Gadi Taub. Really smart guy, Israeli historian. He's a senior lecturer at Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He appears from time to time on Israel's Channel 14. Now, Gadi Taub, just so the American people understand, we have lower courts that were created by Congress under our judiciary acts. Our Supreme Court is created by our Constitution. The amendment process can come out of 2 places, the states or the Congress. All of them have come out of Congress. There was an effort by your Knesset, by a majority in your Knesset, to reform the judiciary, to bring some level of representative government and democracy back to Israel, so that this Politburo, this all-powerful court where they appoint each other, where this Politburo doesn't have the final say on every single thing. 2 things happened, if I'm correct. Number 1, the radical left in your country organized because the court delivers for the radical left. So the radical left in your country is protecting the court. They rose up in riotous ways in the streets, funded by dark money, as you point out in your article, including money out of the United States. And number 2, the court finally ruled, well, you know what, Knesset, you don't have the power to tell us a damn thing. You don't have a power to change a law. You don't have a power to affect us in any way. Is that not tyranny? Or what is that?
Oh, absolutely. It is a tyranny. And the whole crisis over judicial reform has arisen when the right has had enough with the leftist court, which represents the opinion, more or less, this is a guess, this is not necessarily, the court would not necessarily agree, but they represent the opinions of a party called Meretz, who did not make it to the threshold of the parliament. So imagine, Mark, we have an uber government in the court, which represents a party that is too small to get into the Knesset. This is the form of government that we had. So the right finally had enough and said, we are going to reform this system. And we have one weapon that we can use against a court, which, by the way, usurped the power of judicial review. It did not have it by law. It invented it for itself, much like John Marshall, by the way. That was also not originally in the Constitution. So they invented that for themselves. But the Knesset, the parliament, said, we have one weapon, and that is constitutional law. It's called basic laws in Israel because we don't have a constitution, but they made a basic law. And the court audaciously now said we can also strike down basic laws. There is no basis for that in the law. There is no basis for that anywhere, except that they have real power. And what is real power, Mark? When this is a constitutional crisis, right? Because the parliament says this is the law, which will reform the judiciary. The judiciary said we are striking down the law which reforms our bench. And then there's a constitutional crisis. And then the heads of the armed services refuse to say that they will abide by the law that says that they should do the bidding of the elected government. And they sat on the bench. And that was the real scary moment, because in that moment, we did not know if in a constitutional crisis where the armed forces will be. That is a very scary thing. And since the right is more responsible than the left in Israel and was not willing to burn the house, the right backed off the reform, and the reform was shelved. That's what happened.
But just to underscore your point, the generals, the vast majority of them, even your intelligence services, the heads of most of those, decided that they were thrown with the court, that they were not going to comply with orders given to them by the commander-in-chief, who's the prime minister of Israel.
They refused to declare that they would abide by the orders of the government. That's they left it unclear, and that is what cracked the coalition, because the refusal to declare clearly is enough. In a democracy, they should have said clearly that we will abide by the law, and by law, the elected government, the representative of the sovereign, which is the people of Israel, is our commander. And they refuse to say that, hinting that maybe they will side by the courts.
You know, it's an amazing thing. We're in very dangerous times. We have two of the greatest leaders that two democracies, quote unquote, were a republic. I don't even know what you are anymore. But the people of Israel wanted Netanyahu to lead the country. The people of America wanted Trump to lead the country. And it's very interesting that the ruling classes didn't want either. And they used the law and they used the justice system to turn it inside out. They're still trying to put Netanyahu in prison because, at least in the United States, we have a policy that he's sitting president of the United States cannot be indicted because somebody needs to run the country. But in your country, they want to imprison Netanyahu while he's prime minister, dethrone him, if you will, so the court can run the country and hence have somebody else as prime minister. I have to believe that President Trump would be very, very sympathetic to what Benjamin Netanyahu is going through. And I have to believe that when your court and your left in Israel does what it does, it not only undermines the state of Israel, but in the Middle East, at least, it undermines American national security and foreign policy as well. I want to thank you, Gadi Taub, for laying all this out in a beautiful article. A deep state doesn't get any deeper than this. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to speak with you.